Please, sir. Continue,
Can
sir.
you go, can you go to the next slide, please?
Yes, sir.
Yes. No, next one.
Is it, sir?
Yes, yes. Now, since all of you are, most of you are law graduates and are pursuing law, etc., you people would have seen these articles as a matter of when you're studying it. Now, this is the article that gives the power to the central government as well as to the state government to levy taxes both from the central government as well as from the state government. Now, for example, 246(1) will say the parliament has the exclusive power to make laws with respect to any of the matters enumerated in list 1 in the 7th schedule to the constitution. So all taxes which are levied by the central government will be as part of list 1 in the 7th schedule. That is how all those taxes, like for example, your income tax, like your duties of customs, all of them will be levied by the central government. That is in terms of Article 246(1). Now, 246(3) says that the legislature of any state has exclusive power to make laws for such state or any part thereof with respect to any of the matters enumerated in list 3, list 2 in the 7th schedule. So the state government, for example, our Karnataka state government, etc. Now the legislature will have the power to make laws for a particular subject which is there in list 2. So that is why it is called a state list. Now list 2 will have a lot of items. For example, your on the liquor, the state government levies tax, or there is what we call as professional tax, or say the trade tax, luxury tax. These are all taxes levied by the state government. That is in terms of list 2. Now 246(2) says the parliament and the legislature of any state has the power to make laws with respect to any of the matters listed in list 3, which is called the concurrent list. So both the state government and the central government can levy taxes in respect of list 3. So unless there is a coordination, etc., between them, that I will levy tax on this particular area, you levy tax on this. So both the state and the central government can levy tax in terms of items mentioned in list 3, that is concurrent list. So broadly, this is how taxation law works in India, and this is how tax gets imposed in the country. Right. Next 2 slides we will see. Yes. This is what I was saying. This is what is the union list, where the central government will have the powers to levy the tax. For example, duties of customs, that will be levied by the central government, or service tax, that will be levied by the central government. So these are all taxes levied by the central government in terms of the powers given to them in terms of Article 246(1). Next slide. This is list 2. Now, if you look at the slide, you will see excise duty on alcohol, the state government can levy, or taxes on advertisements, professional tax. All this are levied by the state government. So this is in terms of 246(3). Right? So this is broadly the entries in the constitution by which the taxes are levied by the central or the state government. Now, we look at one more slide, then we will stop seeing the slides. Next one. This is how normally the indirect tax regime, say prior to GST, was. So you had the customs duty, you had the central excise duty, you had the sales tax, then you had the service tax. All these taxes were there. Now, what has happened after 1/7/2017 is when GST has come. So once GST has come, there are few taxes that have got absorbed in GST. For example, the central excise tax, the value added tax, the service tax, all these have got subsumed in the GST. Customs duty still remains. So post GST, we have as direct tax, indirect tax will have GST, customs duty, and then you will have direct tax also. That is how broadly the tax regime in India is. Right, sir? Now, this is broadly what the taxing scheme in India is. Now we will get into the second portion of this. Now, if I have to practice tax, this is good enough, sir. Purushottam, sir, you can remove these slides. That's all what I want. I don't
Thank
want
you
to
very
show any more slides. Now, if I have to practice tax, I see it as a career. Now, how will I practice law? How will I start the practice when this is how the scheme works? Now, taxing, the practice in tax is a very interesting practice. Unlike, for example, the other civil areas of practice, for example, a property dispute, or you look at the other civil disputes, maybe under the Negotiable Instruments Act, various civil disputes, these are all disputes on particular controversies. So you need to understand the law relating to that particular dispute, and then you need to understand the controversy to really handle that particular dispute. On the other hand, in a taxing practice, it's very interesting to know that you should be a person who knows a lot of things in order to have tax as a practice. I'll tell you why. See, for example, if you practice tax and then somebody comes to you, sir, what is the tax on Arcanet? Arcanet is a typical product we have, native product, etc. So somebody can ask, what is the tax on Arcanet? Now, we should first know whether it is a dry Arcanet or a wet Arcanet, because the tax will depend upon whether it is wet Arcanet or dry Arcanet. Now, is it enough to know only that? No, you should go slightly more. You should know how Arcanet is maybe cultivated, what is the stage at which it will become a dry Arcanet, what are the various processes you will make to make from a wet Arcanet to a dry Arcanet. So you go slightly more to understand the history of the product, the process of the product, before really coming to a conclusion whether whether tax is payable on that all or not. So broadly, when you look at tax as a practice, there are two ways in which tax can be practiced by lawyers. One, you can become what is called as an in-house counsel. So you can be part of any organization. A number of companies now take lawyers as in-house counsels. That is, your part of the organization. So then you will really know a lot about that particular organization. So if you are, for example, in a software company like Infosys, or you are in a e-commerce company like, for example, Amazon, so you'll know everything about that particular company. What are the various activities that company does? So where does the tax come? Where does tax doesn't come? So what are the goods being supplied by the company? What are the services being provided by the company? So that is one area where you can move in as an in-house practitioner or an in-house counsel of companies. Number of companies are now giving emphasis to it because they would like somebody who has the background of law to really understand about their activities and take calls within the company, whether a particular activity is taxable or not, so that they can take a conscious decision forward. The other aspect is, which of course people think a lot before getting into it, is where you want to practice in a court in the area of taxation. Now there are various judicial fora where tax gets practiced. You have the authorities, you have the tribunals, you have the High Court, then you have the Supreme Court, where taxation gets practiced as an area. But when you practice tax as a law, as an area of practice, you need to be, I would say, a combination of a number of individual personalities. You need to know a little about engineering. You need to know a little about maybe the chemical activities. You need to know something about, I would say, if you're handling a plywood as a product, you should know what are all the various manner in which the plywood gets done. So you need to have a combination of various knowledge of various activities to practice law. That's the uniqueness of practicing tax as a law. you will have sufficient background of different businesses so that you can tell the court how a particular activity is being done, and therefore why a particular activity should attract tax or should not attract tax. Now, what I'll do is I'll just take maybe 3-4 examples in order to impress upon all of you the correctness or the significance of what I am saying. Now, for example, all of you are aware about this gold business. All of you, in your house, you would be going purchasing jewelries. You will be purchasing maybe some people may even buy bars, get it converted into a particular jewelry and all that. So, if you have to argue a matter of levy of tax on gold jewelry, what all should you know? Should you really know that your client handles particular articles of jewelry? Therefore, on that should tax be levied? Or should you know how exactly jewelry gets manufactured? So, from where do you get this original ore? And from the ore, how do you make what they call as a doré bar? The initial product is called a doré bar. So, how do you get a doré bar? How do you refine it? How do you make a bar, refined bar? From there, how do you make a jewelry? Then how does shops operate in jewelry? They'll give the jewelry to a particular big dealer. They may get or may not get money in consideration. They may get gold in consideration. So they will again replenish it. So in order to argue a matter on gold, whether gold is taxable at all or not, it is always an interesting, I would say, a challenge for us to understand the entire process of the emergence of gold till it comes to the point of jewelry. Now, if you look at a civil dispute or civil practitioner, for him, it may not be necessary to understand all these activities in order to solve his dispute. But as a tax lawyer, when you are arguing a matter or when you are advising a client on whether tax is leviable on gold jewelry or not, you need to really know the various processes that are getting into it for the purpose of advising somebody that tax is payable or tax is not payable. Or, for example, let us take the example of an e-commerce company, say Amazon. Now, it's a daily practice today. Most of at least the youngsters are into this habit of maybe ordering in online in Amazon and getting product. So suppose big company like this comes to you for an advice. So then for you to advise on the liability of maybe Amazon to a tax, you need to know how exactly Amazon operates, how e-commerce companies operate. What is this? How does various sellers come on board Amazon? Then from there, where do you place an order? Do you place an order on the marketplace domain, or do you place an order on the seller? How do the goods come to you? Then whom do you pay the money? So all these are interesting activities which an e-commerce company undertakes for you to really know where the liability of tax will come. Or for example, let's take the recent big issue of this online gaming. So taking up an online game, how exactly does this operate? Now most youngsters, etc., they play under this online game, they participate in these games, and then they pay money to participate. They win those prizes. So if an online person who's undertaking an online gaming comes to you, and then you have to advise him, how will you do it? So you need to understand how the online gaming operates. How do machines operate? How does what are the softwares that are there? What are the various applications that are there? So for you to really understand where the tax will apply. Therefore, it's extremely important for a tax lawyer to get to know the various aspects of different businesses in order to really be comfortable in advising people. So to that extent, the practice of taxation as an area of practice is an extremely challenging one, if you have to really look at it. In fact, it is a combination where you need to know everything about businesses. At the same time, you should have a sound knowledge about the basics of various laws. For example, you should have a sound knowledge about the Evidence Act. When you talk about Evidence Act, what types of evidences are considered as appropriate by the courts? What are the internal records which companies maintain which are relevant for an evidence? So therefore, Evidence Act is extremely important to be applied. So therefore, you should have the basic knowledge about the Evidence Act. Or for example, the CPC or the CRPC. So, or for example, the administrative law. So various laws, the knowledge of various laws are extremely important for you to really practice tax as a law. To that extent, it's really a challenging area of practice. So if you're looking at taxation as a career, then I think it will be an extremely good one for people who can, who will have the, I would say, the interest to get into various areas of activities that happen across the country, for you to have a good knowledge about it, so that it makes it easier for you to practice law. Therefore, when the theme is that how does area of taxation as a practice, my suggestion always has been that yes, it's a niche area, it's a specialized area, it would be quite challenging, and the companies, for example, most of the companies who get into areas of taxation are big companies, and those demands that are raised are big amounts. So therefore, they have to be doubly careful when they really come to you. They have to be comfortable that you will be in a position to handle their businesses, to understand their problems, and therefore to advise them. So when that being the case, before you get into area of taxation as a practice, you should really have a good, I would say, inquisitiveness, interest to understand the way activities happen in the country. And once that happens, various businesses, it will be easier for you to apply the law as is prevalent in the country. For example, when somebody says, I have supplied software, I have supplied hardware. Now, is the software part of hardware? Is the hardware different from software? So these are all activities, these are all areas of knowledge that will increase somebody's hold on that particular subject as in order to advise clients. So my suggestion when you look at tax as a career, it's a very interesting one, very challenging one. You need to know the history of business practices. You need to know the history of tax laws, so that you feel comfortable when you advise people who come to you for opinions, etc. Because otherwise it will be difficult for the companies to feel comfortable with you, for the courts to feel comfortable in agreeing to what you say. So to that extent, tax as an area of practice is significantly different from what the other areas of practice are. Those are focused areas, but practice of tax is about the taxation law as a practice is really a niche area of practice, but need to have a huge background. For example, you need to have a knowledge of accounts, how the companies maintain their business of books of accounts, how the various incomes are accounted, and how under what heads they account. So it's a completely wonderful combination of various business areas for you to really feel comfortable, and then take taxation as a practice. So my suggestion is that I don't want to get into the various slides indicating what the taxes are, what is GST about, and what are the different areas of GST, etc. That I've shared the slides with all of you. I think all of you can see it. But then when you think of taxation as a career, as a practice, my limited knowledge, my limited experience has taught me that in order to have some credibility in tax as a practice, you need to read a lot. You need to read a lot, not only about the law books, you need to read a lot about businesses. You need to read a lot about how businesses operate across the globe, not only in our country, across the globe. How does the companies in different areas operate? Then how do we really look at the practice which our companies have? Therefore, how do we take all that and explain to the court? So it's a huge challenge, but it's a very interesting one. So if somebody has to get into tax as a practice, you need to be prepared for a long drive, for long haul of things, but it's a very enriching one at the end of the day. So I thought I will stop my advice at this stage. And if any questions are there, I'm always open to answering these questions. Over to you, Purushottam. Thank you, sir.
Sir, the first question is, so is there a confrontation between this chartered accountant, the chartered secretaries? So would you find that kind of a confrontation while dealing with the issues with the companies, kind of a corporate or commercial establishments?
Yes, see, what happens is, in fact, I would say about 10 years before, there was a very clear demarcation of the areas of practice between a chartered accountant and a lawyer. The chartered accountant was confining himself more to the day-to-day activities of companies in terms of their advising them on how to account incomes, preparation of returns, and more important on certain areas in direct tax, etc. And the litigation practice was mostly left to the advocates. But maybe in the last, I would say 10 years, there have been areas where I would say the practice do converge. So a lot of chartered accountants do get into the practice of even advising companies on litigation. But at the end of the day, my experience always has been that when it comes to the court, when it comes to the various tribunals, etc., it's always easier for the advocates to get into the act and explain to the courts how it happens. To that extent, there is always a line that divides a chartered accountant and an advocate. I would not say there is a confrontation, but yes, the companies do largely rely on chartered accountants for the purpose of advising them on how to handle on a daily basis. But when it comes to a large litigation or a matter in the courts, the companies do realize that that would be a better cup of tea for the advocates. And therefore, they always go on to engage advocates for litigating their matter. So there is, while I would not say there is a confrontation, there is definitely overlapping of the functions of an advocate and a chartered accountant to a limited extent. That's how companies have now started getting into engaging or recruiting what they call as in-house counsels. So advocates, that is lawyers who pass out and who have about say 5-10 years of experience, also now are recruited by the companies to advise them on the legal issues so that they can decide thereafter how do you take it forward in a courts.
No, the thing that I asked because sometimes what we see, even the chartered accountants, the chartered secretaries used to make a trust deed and other deeds, kind of a deeds, which are particularly the work of the lawyers, where they know that the extension of the litigation, they will anticipate that, so these clauses would be invoked and these clauses should not be invoked. That's that kind of an idea which will be anticipated by an advocate, where it is not anticipated by the chartered accountants, even though they are doing this trust deed, the kind of other kind of a partnership deeds and other kind of a conveyances deeds. So in this juncture, so is there any kind of a policy or a kind of a act which prohibits the kind of the CA, CS, so and other professionals, so which forbids this kind of practices?
No, there is there is no.
Because notary is a person who is only authorized to do notary.
Correct, correct.
So even an advocate cannot place his board in his office that he can do notary. So where the Notaries Act particularly forbid the other person who's having a particular license to do notarized kind of a documents. So in that way, is it any kind of a policy or a kind of an act which forbids, puts a bar to that?
No, there is no, I have not come across any legislation that forbids the chartered accountant from, they have to do only a certain act, they are not to do certain acts, etc. But what happens is, if you look at the Chartered Accountant Act and then the guidelines of the Chartered Accountants Institute, they are very clear as to up to what extent the chartered accountants can play a role in advising companies on the accounting practices. See, ideally, what any typical chartered accountant should do is to advise a company and stop with the telling him about the accounting practice. For example, a lawyer cannot get into telling a company about an accounting practice which he should follow. A lawyer can only interpret the law and say, this is the law. Therefore, in your business, this is how the law will operate. Therefore, apply this law to your business and come to a conclusion. That's what a lawyer has to do. So, to that extent, there has to be, I would say, an individual moral responsibility of both the chartered accountant and the advocate to draw a line among themselves as to up to what stage they will advise a company and where will the other person step in. So that is more, I would say, by individual activity and not by any law. Though, in fact, some controversies did come up, maybe I think 2-3 years before, where there was some issue about some of the chartered accountant firms getting into the litigation practice, etc. And then the courts also, in fact, there was one Supreme Court decision that also went into this and said that maybe there should be a line drawn between what a chartered accountant can do and where does an advocate step in, where the CS are not to do what normally an advocate is to be done. For example, to give an example of a trust deed being done, I think there, while a chartered accountant can try drafting it, but I think ultimately the companies or the person who's engaging, who's asking the person to do a draft trust deed should again go back to an advocate and see whether all the clauses relevant are there. So I would say it is more to do with the mindset of companies and of course the chartered accountants or the lawyers who should know up to what extent they can travel and where they should not. It's more to do with an individual behavior.
So is this any association which imparts a kind of a regulation like a tax practitioners association like that? Is this any kind of an association that we found in India?
No, there is no association which is formally recognized. There are tax practitioners association at various levels. For example, the tribunal will have some tax practitioners association, or the High Court also has a tax practitioners bar. So these are all there, but that is not sort of to regulate the activity. It is more to get people together to enhance their knowledge, to participate, to have some sort of sessions like what you people have, and then participate in those sessions and enrich the knowledge. It's not to regulate each other's activities. We don't have anything like that, excepting the Bar Council for an advocate, the Bar Council, state Bar Councils, or the National Bar Council, which will say this is what an advocate is supposed to do. He is not to do anything beyond it. So like that, a chartered accountant guideline is there saying this is what a chartered accountant has to do. If somebody goes beyond it, and unless a complaint gets filed, that really doesn't get noticed.
So thank you very much, sir. Do you think that it's a lucrative practice, as you said, that there is a kind of clients are multinational corporations and a big company, commercial kind of an establishment? Do you think that there is a saturation period is there in this area?
You see, sometimes people do feel that maybe the types of disputes in tax is coming down. What it used to be maybe about 10 years before, at least I myself have seen what I used to handle about 15 years before, and the number of disputes which we are handling today definitely is less. But all I can say is that the area of tax is always an evolving area, because the government also looks at tax as the potential revenue earner for the government. So they look at various business activities which they think can fetch more revenue. Therefore, there is all
Rakshit,
for tax is an area of dispute that will go on. So that is why I'm saying tax as a practice is a very niche practice. And for you to get established in this, you need to really know a lot of background, read a lot to give that sort of a comfort to a client that, yes, I know so much about this particular area. He should feel comfortable that you're good enough to handle these matters. And once you get into that, yes, it is as lucrative as any other areas. Saturation point is something which I think you can always see in any area. For example, the number of lawyers we used to have about 15 years before, the number of lawyers we have today is something completely incomparable. It's about 2 times, 3 times, 4 times the numbers of lawyers. But then at the end of the day, not every lawyer can become good enough. So therefore, it is only those people who work towards becoming a good lawyer who will be in a position to command that sort of a respect. So it's a continuous effort that has to be done in order to get into this tax area as a lucrative practice.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. I would request the audience, if they have any questions that the speaker is ready to answer you, please raise your hand and please speak to the speaker. If you have any questions? Any
Sir,
questions?
namaste. Sir, namaste.
Yeah. Please.
Yes,
please.
madam. Tell me.
Sir, wonderful lecture, sir. Very thank you. Thank you, sir. My question is that, sir, whether it is a mandatory to the advocates to pay the taxes, sir. So if it is mandatory when advocate is not paid, so if it is any affected to on their practice?
Madam, normally what happens is the government also considers the activities that are done by advocates as a service, in the sense that not a service as indicated in service tax law, but as a general service where, as officers of the court, you really help the courts to lay down law. You really help companies to come out of difficulties. You help individual businesses to undertake their businesses with greater ease. So to that extent, the government is very reluctant to impose taxes on advocates. So that's why, for example, there was a controversy whether advocates should be subjected to service tax. Then ultimately they said no, they are not liable to service tax. The companies have to pay service tax on behalf of the advocates. Similarly, in GST also, we have a concept of what is called as reverse charge. So whatever fees you charge from the company, the taxes on that has to be paid by the companies. So to that extent, the government is reluctant to levy taxes on advocates. I don't think till now I have come across a situation where the advocate has been saddled with any liability. Some inquiries here and there have gone, but I don't think ultimately there has been any orders passed asking the advocates to pay tax. One. And these types of inquiries, etc., doesn't normally affect the practice or the name of an advocate. So therefore, that is no issue. But yes, as far as direct tax is concerned, where income tax, that every advocate, like any other individual, has to pay the tax on his taxable income. There are a lot of deductions that are available to the advocates in respect of their professional expenses. So on the total income, what you get, you deduct all the professional expenses relating to your establishment, relating to your practice, etc. The remaining amount, subject to your limits, those taxes have to be paid. So only tax which as of now, which an advocate is liable to pay, is only the income tax. All other taxes, the government has not levied it on the advocates.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Is it quantitative reasoning is needed, sir? This kind of a skill to become a tax practitioner? Uh,
What do you mean by quantitative reasoning? What do you have in
means mathematical analogy.
No, I would say that you see, if you have to, it all depends on the types of disputes which normally come. Now, for example, if you have to explain, I would say a situation like, see, when you know the situation of, suppose there is a data being moved from one office to the another. For example, these lease lines, right? You have a lease line from your office to your house in another place or to your branch in another place, that you send data comes back. So these are all elements of physics that are there. So if you have to explain this, maybe some sort of a quantitative appreciation can be there, needs to be there. It helps you to understand. So as I said, this practice is something where you need to be a person of everything. For you to really explain it to the court better. For example, if I have to argue a matter on liquor, I should really know how liquor is made. How from a basic, maybe a vegetable product or something, a bagasse, and from a bagasse, then you get into an ethyl alcohol. How do you do it to make it into an alcohol which is consumed? So I should know that. I should know that business. I don't need to be a consumer of liquor in order to explain that product, but I should know what that how that product is made. So to that extent, this is one area where it helps you to develop the knowledge of everything possible, everything necessary for you to explain it better to the courts. So to that extent, yes, but not in a very strict sense. You don't need to be a 100%.
Sir, one more question. What is your last question, that any inputs regarding the evasion of tax? Is it a duty of the tax practitioner to give an advice regarding the evasion of tax or reducing the tax for the corporate clients?
No, you see, the fundamental duty of any tax practitioner, you call it as a chartered accountant or you call it as an advocate, is to advise companies on the correct position in law in his opinion. Right? Suppose there is a provision in law, you understand the provision of law, you understand the history of that provision of law and why that provision has been made, and then you frame an opinion on what basis that law has to be applied to your business. Now, if by a simple application, a plain reading, you come to a conclusion that tax is payable, then in my view, it is our duty as officers of the courts or as tax practitioners, be it chartered accountant, be it a lawyer, to tell the companies that on this activity, by the application of this provision of law, you are liable to pay. That's one. So there, I would not suggest that even if the plain reading of law says you are liable to pay, you take a stand that you are not liable to pay. That may not be a correct position. But if on an interpretation of the provisions, where it is possible to take a view that the tax is not payable, then you should really be responsible enough to come to a conclusion that tax is not payable only after doing enough research. And then after that, you tell the client that tax is not payable because of these reasons. And if there are some features in the agreements which you think can create a difficulty for you, you can advise the company that these clauses in the agreement can create difficulties. Therefore, you should take appropriate steps. So tax planning can always be advised. Tax evasion should never be advised. That as a practice, both as a lawyer or as a chartered accountant or even as a business, we should never adopt the.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. I'm really wonderful.
Sir, I have one question, sir.
Who is this?
Sir, I'm Navina. I have
Okay.
one question, sir.
Yes, yes.
Sir, is continuous practice enough for an upcoming lawyer, or you suggest us to do any other course to become an expert in this particular area, like indirect taxation?
Madam, as I started off, nobody can call himself as an expert in any area of law.
Yes, sir.
even though I have just 40 years in indirect tax, I still feel that there is at least about 80% of the knowledge I still have to have.
Okay.
So nobody can think that somebody can become an expert in this area of practice. Two, continuous practice, I would redefine it to say continuous reading of books. That is what is very
Okay.
important. Continuous reading of law, continuous reading of developments in law, reading of various commentaries, various decisions. In fact, as more you read,
Okay.
you yourself will feel more comfortable in that area of
Yes,
practice. The more Supreme Court decisions you read, and you look at, if you look at one Supreme Court decision, in fact, with due respects, I would always consider maybe the Supreme Court decisions the last maybe 10 years before are much more enlightening. So if you look at a Supreme Court decision, it will give a history of what that area of dispute is, what was the initial decision. Then you go back to the initial decision, read it. The more decisions you read, the more comfortable you will feel.
Okay.
So when you talk in terms of even in a presentation or you go to a court, you will feel that more confident in order to explain what it is.
Okay.
So that is why I would always suggest you should do a continuous practice. For that matter, any practice is always, that is why you say you practice profession.
Yeah.
So there's nothing called saturation in practice.
But is there
It's
any
not
other
like
course you would suggest for the upcoming lawyers where they can, it will give them the better idea?
No, there are a lot of these certification courses that are being given by various institutes on specific areas of law.
Okay.
For example, I have come across a certification course by I don't know which college. Some college that was offering in on impact of tax law on intellectual practice.
Okay.
So if you have something like that, it will give you some idea. What is this intellectual property? What is this law relating to IPR? Then how does tax law operate on that? That gives you an added advantage.
Okay.
So the more you can go through a certification course and then gain that knowledge, or you can read books on IPR law, also gain that knowledge.
Okay.
But nothing helps you then arguing a matter in a court.
Right.
The knowledge which you get when you argue a matter in a court, the realization that you have not prepared in a particular aspect, that is something which will really help you in the long run. So that is the best thing that can ever happen. How many a number of years of practice you have, how many matters you argue, every other matter, every new matter will be a
It's
challenge.
different. Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your answer.
Nitin, you have a question. Nitin Samudrala. Nitin, are you there?
Hi, sir. Yes, sir. Hi, sir. Very happy with your presence, sir. Sir, I have a question regarding the practice which the chartered accountant does and when compared to the lawyer, sir. So I'm a student who even was the person who took the chartered accountancy as a course, sir. After that, I have completed my law course. I see that same same tax laws has been implemented in the course of chartered accountancy, and same provisions are there. And the same thing I have found in the study in the law course, sir. What could be the difference in the profession which we take up as a lawyer or with the chartered accountant, sir?
See, the manner in which you appreciate law, appreciate a provision is completely different when you are a chartered accountant and when you are a lawyer.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Now, normally what happens is as a chartered accountant, your base is more from an accounting practice than in law. Right? So when you look at a provision, you have an accounting practice in mind, and therefore you read the provision and understand it in a particular manner. But when you read a provision as a lawyer, you have different decisions in mind when you look at that particular provision. A lot of decisions come to your mind when you look at that provision, and then you see that this is what the provision means. So you understand it in a different manner when you're practicing, when you're looking at a provision as a lawyer and as a chartered accountant. The perspective is completely different because your background is different. In terms of, when I say background, your approach in studies is completely different as compared to a chartered accountant and a lawyer. Therefore, the perspective will be completely different. That is why a number of people, having become chartered accountants, turn into lawyers. So when you do that, you make use of the background which you have as a chartered accountant and then take it as part of the practice in law, and then you try to present it. You will never normally find lawyers turning into chartered accountants. Chartered accountants turning into lawyers is more often. Of course, that's also difficult. I mean, to become a chartered accountant is very difficult also. I think it's a pass percentage about 5% or so out of the total as
Yes.
compared to lawyers. Lawyers, we have larger, greater number of pass percentages. So therefore, that is difficult also. But perspective is completely different. The view is completely different.
So one thing, sir, in general, usually in auditor helps the company in the way of reducing tax burdens for the company, right? So the same thing when it comes to the lawyer, a company will come to the lawyer part when they have any tax related issues. But in particular, if you think that auditor does the same, no, sir, into the company, they just wanted to reduce the disputes which arise in taxation, which the government forms. So the same thing a lawyer does when the when the tax problem arises. So I think the same thing internally the accountant does, externally the lawyer does.
Maybe that's what I said. Sometimes it could be overlapping, but the manner in which the reason is given for reducing the tax is completely different.
Okay.
The manner in which a chartered accountant advises a company to reduce the tax will not be on a complete appreciation of the provision of law as it should be appreciated.
Okay.
Whereas a lawyer tells the company that because of this reason you reduce the tax or you don't pay tax, you reduce the burden of tax is because the history to that provision. So the lawyer will tell you why that provision has come. What is the history of that provision? It may not happen so much for a chartered accountant because his background is different and his approach to a problem is completely different. So
Yeah, this
there
may
are,
lead to tax evasions also.
which one?
This may lead to tax evasion also, no, sir.
No, tax evasion is, see, nobody has to contribute to a tax evasion.
Yeah.
Whether it is a chartered accountant or an advocate or a company, nobody should approach a problem saying that I want to evade a tax. Then that's not a correct business practice.
Perfect.
But a lawyer looks at it from a different angle. A chartered accountant looks at it from a different angle.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nitin, sir. Nitin. Any question? Sir, is there any kind of a landmark judgment which gives the general proposition of law where this is the guidelines you need to follow while practicing law? Is this any kind of a landmark judgment you can quote, you can cite?
I don't think there is any landmark judgments like that because each judgment is given in a particular set of facts. See, the tax law, unlike, for example,
so this is the parameters where you need to follow it, like a parameters or a guidelines.
It may not be there. But the reason is this: a particular tax dispute goes to the Supreme Court in a particular set of facts, and then the position of law to be applied there. Unlike, for example, an arbitration dispute or even a negotiable instruments act or issues relating to the SURFACE Act. All those are cases where the Supreme Court examines the act as a whole. Whereas when you come to tax, it's specific provision being looked at, and therefore you may not have a decision that will explain all aspects of a particular tax in one place. That may not be possible. But you can look at decisions like, for example, there is a Supreme Court decision in All India Tax Federation. That decision gives to an extent how taxes are being collected in the country and how indirect taxes are destination-based tax, how the direct taxes are not. So that broadly it gives you an idea, but it really doesn't to that extent help people understanding that these are the parameters I should have. I should have this as the formula to apply in every matter. I don't think you will come across any decisions in tax in that manner.
So thank you very much. Is this any kind of a queries or questions to be left? Any questions? So thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. So at lastly, I would thank the speaker, as he has telling the one thing that, see, if you want to become a practitioner, the academic skills is not enough. To become a winner, academic skills is not enough. You need to go further. So in the same way, if you want to tax practitioners, the thing that first we become a very good advocate and a sound knowledgeable advocate. Then we should practice this area with all the see, regarding the tax evasion also, he said, he repeatedly said that, see, it is not a correct practice to go with the tax evasion and all. So it's a kind of an ethical duty of the lawyer, and even it extends to the tax practitioner not to advise regarding the evasion of tax, but to interpret the law in a proper way, and this is need to be done. So this is the proper advice to be given to the corporate clients and the commercial establishments. So that is a kind of a ethical duty of every lawyer to follow. So in this regard, so our speaker, Shivdas sir, so has taken a lot of patience in hearing the appropriate question. He may think that it's an inappropriate. So we we apologize for that, the questions, if we felt that it's an appropriate or inappropriate questions. So the major thing that we should be very grateful for is kind patience and kind of redressing to the large number of audience. Sir, I always thankful, and we are always grateful for your kind of service to this organization. So we'll be forever with us. So your intellectual discussion is always there on online, where the millions and millions of law students will watch your video, watch your advice, take your advice regarding the tax practitioner, sir. So thank you very much for being with us. So I'm closing the session, sir. Thank you very much for being with us. So we'll definitely
so much.
call you again regarding any kind of a taxation issues will crop up in our audience, sir. Thank you very
No
much, sir.
problem. Thank you so much. God bless you. God bless you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
I'm closing this session.